Hey, y'all. Can y'all hear me and see me okay? There's just three of us on here. Well, four counting me. Um, but that's kind of nice. Just a small crowd tonight. Can y'all hear me and see me? Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Dustin. Very good. There we go. A few more people coming on now. We're up to five, but very good. However many we are tonight, I'm excited to talk to y'all again. Excited to be here with y'all. And I'm even made a few notes tonight for things that I wanted to talk to y'all about. And one of them, well, a few of them actually, I was thinking about some of the questions well, for those who don't know, one of the things we did in the Magnum Opus meeting is we did a big, and most of y'all are in Magnum Opus at this pledge level. But one of the things we did was an equinox. Is it the equinox? Yeah, the equinox ritual. Why am I bringing this up? The equinox ritual. Oh, but part of what we also did was just had people send in their questions, and we went through and tried to answer some of the questions that y'all had sent to us, and there were a few that just kind of stuck in my mind, and I wanted to go back and touch on a little bit, which is why I called this live stream "Do as Thou Wilt." Which everyone knows by now is a famous quote by Aleister Crowley, where he says, "Do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." And most people by now know that that doesn't mean what the non-magical world thinks it means. A lot of people, when they hear "do as thou will," they think that means do whatever you want to do. And those who have even the remotest the smallest understanding or familiarity with anything that Crowley talked about or wrote about knows that that's not what it means. That's not the case at all. Like when he's talking about "do as thou will," it doesn't mean do what you want. And there's been tons and tons of stuff written on the concept of will, and people still talk about it a lot. Um, and a lot of people even think that that's something that's only in Thelema, like "do as thou will," that's a concept, that will is only something that's part of the fabric of the religion or system of Thelema. And first off, that is not true at all. I mean, the concept of will, it may not be condensed and used in that one word or described in that one way, but essentially what it means, the sentiment of it is expressed through all magical traditions with no exception, even like Christianity. There's a scripture in the Gospel of Luke talking about Jesus where it says the Son of Man did not come to did not come to be served. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. Essentially what he's talking about there is will. So what it means, people go on, and tons of essays and all kinds of stuff have been written where people try to describe what will is. And honestly, I think it's one of those things where the more difficulty people have kind of articulating it or describing it or going into all the philosophical ramifications of it and all of that sort of stuff, I think it's usually because their understanding of it is still clouded. Like they don't really comprehend the simplicity of what it is. And I even wrote something about this on Twitter recently about the simplest way. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because in the Magnum Opus groups, one of the questions that someone asked, I can't remember who it was, I can't remember which circle they were in, but someone was asking about how do you go about knowing your will? And I just kind of, the only thing I really said whenever I answered this question in the classes or in the group meeting was, what is it that you love doing? What is it that you're passionate about? What is it that you're excited about? What is it that you lose yourself in? And it's going to be different things for different people. For some people, it might be music. For me, when I was really young, it was always magic. And one of the things that I talked about, for example, was how I had always looked at books on magic and thought, if I could contribute something to that body of work, then I would have made it. To me, that was like someone who plays music thinking, if you can play at a sold out stadium, then you've made it. To me, that's how I always looked at writing a book on magic. It's not honestly, in the real world, that's not something that's glamorous. It's not something that's going to make you a millionaire or any of that kind of stuff. Books as a whole are not something that people just buy tons and tons of anymore, unless your name is Stephen King or, someone in that vein. For the most part, authors struggle to make a living. So it's not like some glamorous, wealth encrusted life that you're going to have if you're an author, for the most part, especially if you write about magic, because the people who buy books on magic are going to be even rarer, even an even smaller number. But still, to me, that was what I was passionate about. That was what I loved. That was what meant something to me. Magic. So finding what gives you joy to do is a very, very strong clue about doing your will. And then figuring out how to pour as much of yourself into doing that as you possibly can. But that's only half of it. That's doing your will, the small you. But what you're wanting to do is align your will with God's will, with the universe's will, with the divine source's will. Bring your will and the will of God together so that they are enmeshed and move as one. What does that mean? Well, what is God's will? God's will, I always talk about how when we say God created the world in magic, it doesn't mean the same thing that it does in religion. That in religion, they look at it, when you say God created the world, they look at it as like an artist creating an art piece, like a painter creates a painting or a sculptor creates a sculpture, where at the end of the process, the artist is here and the piece they've created is here, and they're two separate things. And in religion, that's sort of what they look at that's sort of the way they see the phrase God created the world. They see God as this force or this man or this being or this intelligence, whatever it is, that's in the heavens somewhere, and it creates the world down here, and it just looks down at it happening like a painter that created an art piece looks down at it. That's not what we mean when we say God created the world in magic. Y'all have heard me say this many times, but I'm saying it again just because it ties into will. What we mean by do as thou wilt, or what we mean by the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. Well, when we say God created the world in magic, what we mean is that God is like shorthand or a word that allows us to conceptualize this infinite source of consciousness and energy that lies outside the domains of time and space. In order to be infinite, you have to be outside time and space. If you are inside time and space, then you are finite. If you are inside space, then there is a limit to your size, because space will dictate your size. It's like they always say that if you get a baby shark and you put it in a small tank, it will never grow to its full potential. Like, it will only grow as big as its tank is. The bigger the tank you put the shark in, the bigger the shark will grow. That's what space does. Space makes our potential for growth finite. So in order to be infinite, you have to be outside the boundaries of time and space. The same way as if you are eternal, as if you had no beginning and no end, then you have to be outside the limits of time and space. Because if you are inside time and space, then you have a beginning and you have an ending. So what we're talking about when we talk about God is an infinite intelligence, an infinite source of energy that lies outside the boundaries of time and space. When we say God created the world in magic, what we are saying is this infinite source of energy and consciousness poured itself into the boundaries of time and space and became the world. It became us. Not all of it. All of it can't pour itself into time and space because it's infinite. It's never ending. This is what causes things like evolution. The more God pours itself, it's still an ongoing thing. It's not like God created the world and then ceased. It says at one point in the Bible that God rested. Well, when you rest, it means to take a break before you begin again. So what God wants to continually do is pour more of itself continually and eternally into time and space. Why? Because that's what causes evolution. It wants us to evolve continually. Not just evolution in the sense of like some people believe that we started off, like humanity started off as other kinds of life forms and then gradually changed over time to become what we are now. That's one kind of evolution. It absolutely is. Like, say if that's true. I don't know if that's true or not. I have no idea, but that's what people tell me. That's what I've, was told in school when I was a kid. But let's say for a second, just for the sake of this analogy, that it is true. What that would show, if what they say is true, then it would show that we went from a point of being one-celled organisms to gradually evolving to, like, say, sea life in the ocean, to things with bigger brains like fish, to eventually coming onto land and becoming whatever it was, lizards or amphibians or whatever it is. As we go through this process, what happens over time, as time goes on, we become more complicated containers for divinity, so that divinity can use us more. Divinity can use us more, can use our intellect and everything else more to do things in the world than it could use single-celled amoebas. So there is that kind of evolution. Evolution as in physical evolution that embodies more and more consciousness. Right now, humanity is like the peak of consciousness in this world. Maybe that won't always be true. Maybe it will. I don't know. But right now we are. Right now, humanity is the peak of consciousness. And the reason we were evolved to this is because divinity wants to express itself and interact with time and space in more and more intricate organisms that experience greater and greater states of consciousness. Does that make sense? So there's that kind of evolution. But the other kind of evolution is just us evolving in our own personal everyday lives. To continue, God does not want to stagnate. That's the meaning of that parable about the talents. The master gives one man a certain number of talents, and he gives another man a certain number of talents, and he gives another man a certain number of talents, and he says, go out and do something with these. And one man goes out and invests them, and one man goes out and does something else, and one man goes out and buries the talents that he's given by the master. Talents are like gold coins or money. He goes out and buries his talents. And whenever the master comes back, he calls the first man and he says, what did you do with the talents that I gave you? And the man says, I went and invested them and I made you a return of this much money. And the master says, well, that's great. That's perfect. You took what I gave you and you turned it into more. And then the second man comes and he says basically the same thing. I went out and did this with it, and your money, it returned this much interest on your money. So you have more than you gave me to invest. And the master says, that's great. And then he calls the third man up and he says, what'd you do with the talents I gave you? And the man says, I was scared, so I buried them. And here's the money you gave me back. And the master says, he casts them out. He says, you didn't do anything with what I gave you. You did nothing with it. So even though they're talking about money, they're also talking about something else. They're talking about more. And I always found it kind of, I don't guess ironic is the word, just kind of poetic, I guess, that the money that they were talking about was called talents, when kind of what this parable is talking about are what we today would call talents, your abilities, the way that you are able to do things in the world. Because we all have different talents. We all have different abilities. What that story is saying was we weren't just supposed to take those and hold on to them and not do, just use them to serve ourselves. And this is the same thing Jesus is saying in the Gospel of Luke when he says the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. You didn't just come to do your will. You didn't just come to my mind went blank. You didn't just come to do your will alone. You came to help humanity evolve. That's what God's will is. So the way you enmesh the two, the way you enmesh your will and the will of God, the way you do them both simultaneously, is you take what it is that you love. You take what it is that you're passionate about. You take what it is that you came into this world to do, and you use it in some way to help other people learn, to help other people grow, to help other people evolve. You find so many people in the world that want to be leaders in some way, that want to be looked up to, that want to be admired. That's not what it says we're here to do. Now, those things might happen organically. Maybe people will start to admire you, but there's a difference in the way what the world usually rewards people for what it admires in them, and the way that the divine source rewards people for I'm not even sure how to say that. I'll give you an example. Like my boxing coach, he loves boxing. One of the things that he does is takes kids in, like young kids, and trains them that would never have any way of obtaining this kind of training on their own. They don't have father figures. They don't have mentors. They don't have the financial ability to even be able to take lessons like this. What he loves doing is being able to take those kids and train them, because it teaches them things. It teaches them more than just how to punch somebody. What it teaches them is the same thing you learn from any kind of martial art. You learn things like discipline, self-discipline. You learn things like self-respect and respect for others. You learn things like honor. Those are the kinds of things that he's trying to instill in these kids. He's doing his will. He's doing what he loves doing, which is being in the world of boxing. And he's doing God's will. He's doing the universe's will at the same time. And the thing is, when those two things click together and turn harmoniously, synchronistically, that's what they mean whenever I think it was Crowley that said, whenever you're doing this, it will feel as if you have the momentum of the entire universe at your back, pushing you forward. That's exactly what they're talking about. Marilyn Jean says, what if we experience blocks in pursuit of that passion or calling? Is there a magical way to address the blocks or hindrance? You just do magic on it. You just do your rituals for that purpose. You do your rituals for the purpose and goal of that hindrance being removed, or to have the situation blessed in some way. I mean, that's what you're supposed to be doing with magic. You're supposed to be taking it and using it in everyday practical ways, practical means of life. Just reading what y'all are saying. Give me 1 second. Yes. Nicole says, is it the more we evolve, the higher our vibration, the divine, the more of divinity we can hold? Yes, that's what you're doing when you're doing magic. You are increasing your capacity for how much astral light, uh, divinity, whatever you want to call it, that you can hold. That's one of the reasons for doing daily rituals, which is something else I'm going to get into in just a second. But that's ultimately the easiest and most simplest way to understand true will, is taking what you love, what you're passionate about, what you have a natural inclination for, what you have a talent for, taking that, getting really good at it, doing it, and then finding some way to use it to help other people. And there's a million different ways that can be done. And that, like I said, it's like Jesus said, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. That doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be in some glamorous rock star way. It may be, it can be in a way where nobody even knows you're ever doing it. For me, it was in the form of writing books on magic, and even doing Patreon, being able to talk about this stuff with people who are also doing these practices. But that's the first thing: finding what you love, what you're passionate about, what you have the natural inclination to do, what you have the talent for, and two, putting it to work in some way where it will contribute to the evolution of humanity. It's like somebody said one time, I can't remember who it was, but they were saying, um, if you can't break something down and explain it really in a really simple way, it's because you don't really understand it. And I don't think that's necessarily true 100% of the time, but I think it's true a lot. I think the more deeply you understand something, the more simply you can describe it. And like I always said with magic, it's not like I have anything new or like I'm, you know, contributing something to the field of magic that hasn't been done before. All I have tried to do is take things that people far smarter than me have already said, have already done, have already demonstrated in some way, and break it down in a way to make it more accessible to the average person, to make it more accessible to me. Like I think about when I first started this path, even the first 10 years that I was doing this stuff, I tried to write books that would have helped the person I was during those years understand this stuff better and put it into play a little better. So that was the first thing I want to talk about. Just that, do as thou will, and true will, and what it means when you align your will with the will of divinity. The will of divinity is for all of us to evolve, to not stagnate, to not stop growing, to continually learn and change and develop. To not spend our lives looking backwards. We're not supposed to spend our whole lives looking back. Not looking back at the things that have been, but looking forward with hope. So aligning our will with the universal will. That was the first thing. That was a question somebody asked. Another question someone asked was about daily practices, like what they were asking me and Derek, like, both, what our daily practices look like now, and does it look the same? And here's the thing: it doesn't look the same as it always has. That your practices will continually evolve over time. The more years you're doing this, the more your practices, the more you understand what these practices are doing, the more proficient you're going to become at them, and they will evolve. You'll find more and more simple ways of doing the same things. There will be certain core components of it that don't ever change, but there will be some things that do. But the reason I brought this up, um, some people kind of think that, like when we're talking about things like, just to use a word that sounds so pretentious, uh, and so lofty, and like something we can never attain or any of that stuff, to use the word enlightenment. Keep this in mind. A lot of people think that when you reach a certain place on this path, uh, that you don't have to do things anymore, that you don't have to do magic anymore. You reach a point, and uh, you're finished. You reach the grade of magus, which corresponds to Hakma, or you reach the grade of Ipsissimus, which corresponds to Kether, and that you're finished and you don't have to do magic anymore. You've completed it. That is not true. You don't charge your phone one time and it stay charged forever. Anyone, one of the ways that you can see that that's not true is by the story of the Buddha. Yes, Holly says, I would think you would continuously need spiritual sustenance. That is one component of it, exactly. If it's not like you eat a meal one time and your body is forever sustained. You have to eat every day, multiple times a day. Same way with feeding your soul. Your soul has to continue to eat. Your soul has to take in nourishment if it's going to continue. Even your mind. Like the Bible says something, there's a scripture in there about how you should continuously refresh your mind by reading these things over and over. Don't say read it one time and think you know it all and move on. It says continuously, like, refresh your mind. Same way with the Buddha. What I meant a while ago when I said this word sounds so pretentious and all this sort of stuff is when we talk about the concept of enlightenment. Even after the Buddha achieved enlightenment, he didn't stop meditating. Even after he came out and announced that he had awakened, like people approached him and they said, what are you? Are you a god? Are you a man? What is it? What are you? And the Buddha answered, I am awake. And that's what got translated into enlightenment. They translated I am awake into I am enlightened. But even after he reached that state of awakening, even after he reached that state of enlightenment, he would still separate, and he had people, tons of people, thousands of people surrounding him that he would, teach and give sermons to and teach practices to and all this kind of stuff. There would still be times when he had to get away from those people, when he would seclude himself for weeks at a time and do nothing but meditate. If you think, oh, well, he's enlightened, he's finished, he's awake, he's done all he needs to do. That's not what his life shows. His life shows that even after he reached those states of consciousness, he would still continue to separate himself from the hordes and the masses, seclude himself away, and he would meditate for weeks at a time. Why? Not just for spiritual sustenance, but that's a big part of it. That's a huge part of it. The other part of it is, it's like energetic hygiene. This is one of the reasons, and there's different ways of going about this. You can work on different levels, like mostly what the Buddha did, like mostly what they teach Westerners in Buddhism is working more with like the mental plane of reality. What we are doing in magic is more working with the energetic, the astral, and the etheric planes of reality. Well, what we're doing with our daily rituals, in addition to giving ourselves spiritual sustenance, is we are doing the equivalent of cleansing ourselves. We are taking showers. We are brushing our teeth. If you don't do those things in the physical world, you don't just take a shower one time and you're clean forever. You don't just brush your teeth one time and then you're good to go for the rest of your life. These are things that you have to do daily in order to maintain your physical hygiene. So in magic, there are practices that you're going to need to do to maintain your energetic hygiene. What it does, what I mean by that, your energetic hygiene is keeping your aura, keeping your energy system and your temple space free or clean from random outside energies. I always say that we are constantly, every single day, we are exchanging energy with every single person, place, and thing that we come in contact with. Picking up other people's and other places' impurities, even. That has to continually be cleaned. That's like the Buddha when he's out, he says, okay, I'm awake, I'm enlightened, but he's still dealing with thousands and thousands of people. So he's taking on a lot of their energetic impurities, the same way he's just taking on the energetic impurities of walking through the world that accumulate in places, stagnant energy, all of that kind of stuff. Energy that doesn't belong to you. Not only your own energetic residue, but the energetic residue that you pick up from people, places, and things around you. It doesn't matter how far you get along this path, that stuff will still have an effect on you. So part of daily practice, there's no teaching in the world that says that you reach a certain place and you're done. None say that. You have to continually maintain that kind of energetic hygiene. Or even training at the gym. You don't go in and lift weights one time and you're good forever. Or go in and do a few jumping jacks and you're good forever. You have to be consistent with that. You have to maintain that. If you don't use it, you will lose it physically. And as above, so below. Same way with these spiritual practices. Just like you can lose muscle, you can also lose spiritual muscle, energetic muscle. You can lose the power that you've developed, being not lose it completely. Like for example, you'll lose strength. You'll still be able to pick stuff up, but you may not be able to bench press 300 pounds. You may lose that ability. The amount that you can do may decrease. Same way with magic. The more magic you do, the more energetic muscle you're building up. When you start slacking off, you start to lose some of that energetic definition. And I'm going to talk about that a little more in just a second too. And the other thing is there's different ways that you can go about doing this, like this energetic hygiene. Yes, Gannicus says long stretches away from my practice and I notice it. It's much harder to visualize. So he's saying the more he takes time off from his practices, the harder it is to visualize. Absolutely. The other thing is, like, if you do take some time off, sometimes it's inevitable. Sometimes there will be times in life when you do not have a way of doing this, where you're traveling, you're on the road, who knows what it is, but there will be circumstances and situations in your life where you can't always do this stuff every day. And if you're off for a little bit of time, when you go back, you'll think, it'll feel like during those times when you're not doing it, you'll think, oh, I'm not really losing anything. I don't really feel any different. But then when you go back and you do it again, when you do get back on schedule and you do it for that first time, it's like, oh my God, like I forgot how good this feels. It's like taking a shower after not being able to have one for a week. You just feel clean again. You feel energized again. You feel up again. Exactly. You can't judge yourself. You just get back on the horse. And I'm going to go into that again in just a second, go back to that, touch on that about the practices. But another thing I wanted to talk about, someone asked a question about would we consider doing initiations in magnum opus? Would that be something like on the menu for later on down the road? And I said, I don't know yet. Basically what I said was we'll put a pin in it and come back and revisit that concept later. Oh, Genica says that was him. So what I would say is if something like that were to happen, it would have to be in person, not on the internet like this. It would have to be done in person. But I also said that one of the reasons that, I'm not real big on that kind of stuff, on, things that follow like a format of an order or a lodge or whatever it is, any kind of magical group where you're initiated into those sort of things, that kind of stuff, is, I guess the easiest way to describe it would be, I'm not going to say any names or anything like that. I'm just going to say that there's a certain group, a certain magical group that they have basically 3 levels of initiation. And the first level of initiation, you're given an address, you show up at this building, you'll meet people there, you'll be blindfolded, they take you down into the basement of this building, and in this building there is a well in the basement. You will get in this well, and there's other things goes along with it, what's it called, invocation, people reading stuff, all of this sort of stuff. But essentially you go down into this well and a top is placed over it, and you will sit in the pitch dark in this well for what amounts to about 15 minutes in reality. It doesn't seem like 15 minutes. If you're sitting down there in a dark well with no idea what's going on above you, and like in the old days when you went into an initiation, whenever you would go in, the first thing they made you do was hand over your sword. Nobody walked around without a sword in the old days. That was your protection. It was a hostile world. You might need it at any minute. You always kept your sword on you. Whenever you handed over your sword, it's like you were defenseless. You're not used to feeling that way. You're not used to being that helpless. Our modern day equivalent of that would be your cell phone. So when you go into an initiation like this, you would hand over your cell phone. You would not have a phone. So you're sitting in this well, it's pitch dark. You don't know what the hell's going on outside of it. You don't know how long you've been in here. All you know is you're just in this complete black void for what could seem like forever. In reality, like I said, it's only about 15 minutes. And then the top is taken off of the well. People will help you out. You're welcomed in. So what that symbolizes, that level of initiation, that what they're doing, keep in mind, when we did the class on initiation, what we talked about is how initiation means a death and a rebirth. That in some symbolic form, you're dying and you're being reborn. And that's what the sacrament of baptism is. When you get lowered under the water, you're being buried under the water, you're dying. And when you come up out of the water, you are a new person. You've been washed clean. You've been reborn. It's where the Christian concept of, born again comes from. They don't understand that now. They think it means something else entirely, but that's what it is. You were initiated. You were reborn. The old you died. A new you was born. You had been reborn. That's the symbolism behind the well initiation. As you go down into the well, you are buried. You are in the land of the dead. Whenever you come up out of that well, you are a different person symbolically. It's sending very strong messages to your unconscious and subconscious mind is what it's doing. Because that's what those things speak in. Those things speak in images, not words. So that's one initiation. That's the first level. Second level initiation, and keep in mind there's more to it than this. I'm just giving you the bare bones of what's happening here. In this second initiation, you'll be brought back to that same building, back into that same room, where there is or not into the same room where there's a well, but into a room where there's a pool. And there'll be people in the pool, and there's people standing around the pool, and everybody's like laughing and having a good time. And they'll say things to you, and you're supposed to say things back to them, that things that you've memorized, all that. And at some point during the process, someone is going to say to you, there's a wineskin hanging on the side of this pool. Get this wineskin and let's have a drink. Let's celebrate. The minute you lean over to pick up this wineskin, to get this wineskin out of the pool, somebody's going to boot you right in the ass and you're going to flip off head first into the water. What that initiation is about, it's supposed to be trying to teach you can't rely on these people. This magical order, this magical lodge, this spiritual group, this coven, whatever it is, honestly, when things are really, really hard, you can't depend on any of those people. You can't depend on them in this world, and you can't depend on them in the magical sense of the word. This is the same thing like the story of Jesus when he's getting ready to be crucified. This is illustrating the exact same principle, the exact same concept. When Jesus is getting ready to be crucified, 2 people stayed with him. 2. None of the disciples. They all ran. They all abandoned him. They denied him, said, "We don't know him." The only 2 people that stayed with him as he died, hanging on that cross, were his mother and Mary Magdalene, who some say was his wife. The 2 Marys. The 2 Marys were the only ones, the 2 women were the only ones that had enough nuts to stay with him when he's dying. The men all ran. They betrayed him. They sold him out. When times got hard, they ran to save their skins. I always talk about how, for me, initiation was not a symbolic thing. It was more of a reality. When I was initiated, for me, initiation, when I went to the land of the dead, I went to the land of the dead. I was taken out of this world. I was taken out of the world of the living, and I was sent into the world of the dead for 20 years. What usually happens in the land of the dead is you have no way of interacting with or changing anything going on in the world of the living. And that's exactly what happens in prison. You are completely and absolutely separated from the world of the living, and you have no effect on it, and it has no effect on you. So and then whenever I came out, I was reborn. I was reborn into the world of the living. I died and I was reborn. My initiation was more realistic in certain senses, less symbolic. The same way the initiation about not putting your faith, not putting your trust into these other people, whether it's the disciples running and leaving Jesus to die, or whether it's somebody in your own lodge or order kicking you in your ass off into the water. When you go to prison, that's when you learn who your real friends are, when you learn who your real family is. I don't mean somebody who's going to sit there on the phone and listen to you cry when you've had a bad day. I mean somebody who is really going to be there when it is inconvenient for them to be there. And for the most part, who was there for me week in and week out the whole time I was in prison? The woman who adopted me as my mother, and Lori. So many people, most people, as soon as I was in a bad place, they all ran off and left me to die. They deserted me. I learned not to put my faith in the people of this world. And I think sometimes when people are initiated into groups, when they go through some sort of initiation like that, they build an identity for themselves off of that. And they start to think that, oh, I've been initiated into this group or that group or whatever it is. So these are the people that are, going to have my back through thick and thin, whatever it is, that are going to be there, as my ride or die, as people say now. And then they one day, maybe some people never go through anything bad and never have to realize that these people can't really be counted on or trusted or whatever it is. But the point of it still is that these people cannot do this work for you. Ultimately, it's you that is responsible for your own salvation. You have to work out your own salvation. It's between you and God, not between any other people in any group or anything else, not with people you think are your friends or people you view as your teachers or any of that kind of stuff. And Holly says, kind of on and off topic, but why are women not allowed in certain lodges? Whole lots of reasons. It's just like there's some groups that men aren't allowed to be in. And they, honestly, it's one of those things where people need their own stuff. Women need their own rites of initiation and mysteries, and men need certain of their own. I'll give you one example with men. The thing about men, it's all kind of practical and psychological in a lot of ways. The thing about men is if they stay around only women all the time, if they're around women all the time, they get soft. And not only do they get soft, but the women also grow bored of them. Men have to go off on their own. There was a book about this stuff a long time ago. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus, something like that. And they talked about the difference in the psyche of men and women and all this sort of stuff. And one of the things they said is men have this need to spring away from women. Like they have it's not there all the time. Sometimes they're just fine being around women, but they have times when, if they're going to remain psychologically healthy, they have to spring away and, you know, have their, you know, adventures in the world where they do whatever it is. Maybe it's go to the Masonic Lodge and smoke cigars with the boys, you know, a couple of times a month, whatever it is. It's like they have to go out and have this little adventure in order to come back. And, you know, that's just that. I don't know what women do. You know, I'm just saying that's one of the things that men do. It's a lot of it is just psychological stuff. The other thing that I wanted to tell y'all about, and this ties into daily practices also. So y'all remember in, like, I did a little short, almost like a mini book review recently where I was talking about Adventures of a Magus, which was written and illustrated by this guy. I don't know if that's his real name or not, but he goes by the name Mars. Mars, did he write it on here? Does he use a last name? I'm not seeing it on here, but I know he uses the name Mars, and I know you can get this off of anywhere like Amazon or what have you. But, you know, one of the things for me, one of the things that I think this book is so great for is, you know, I've talked about how I don't really read books on magic anymore. It's not that I don't just read books on magic. Honestly, I don't really read books at all anymore. I find it, I think if you can, it's probably a good thing. You know, you want to exercise your mind, but reading books became very, very difficult to me. The only books that I do delve into at all now are things that I've read a million times and want to share with y'all, and I'm reading them again, you know, like the ones that we've been going over, like Learning Ritual Magic and all that sort of stuff. What eventually happened to me was I learned to learn new things and get information in new ways, not necessarily through books. One of them is just by like doing things, you know, learning new skills, what have you, whether it's learning to drive or boxing or whatever it is, you know, learning new things through tutors and hands-on experience. The other thing was when I worked at the Met for that year, and even you know, went there every day for a year before that. Part of what was happening was I was learning to read the symbolism in the Sumerian, and to a much lesser extent, the Egyptian artifacts at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. You know, figuring out like what they were expressing through all this imagery and symbolism. So in a lot of ways, it became easier for me to take in new information through visual forms than through reading. That wasn't always the case. I used to read constantly, all the time. I had an entire storage facility full of books that I had read on everything. You know, I would exhaust topics. I would jump from reading like just about everything Freud wrote to delving into military history, you know, stuff about the Vietnam War and, you know, Japanese military tactics and the Peloponnesian Wars and all of this kind of stuff. And then I would just start reading, you know, just mowing through literature like Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and all that kind of stuff. It was like I just went from one thing to the other, just devouring it all, trying to take it in. I used to love to read. And then something happened and I couldn't read anymore. So one of the good things about this book is that you don't have to do a lot of in-depth reading. He uses a ton of illustrations to make this stuff really easy to understand, like the lesser ritual of the hexagram. You know, he breaks all of that down in imagery. Stuff about music, magic squares, how to make talismans, you know, all of this kind of stuff, different rituals. Instead of writing them out like step 1, do this, step 2, do that, he does it almost entirely through illustrations that are very easy to understand, that get the point across. And there is some reading, you know, you have to, you know, pretty much necessarily have some reading to supplement the illustrations to describe what you're doing there. But it is by and large a book on magic written almost entirely visually. Reason I bring this up is because he also illustrated another book. Some of y'all might be familiar with this guy, Marco Visconti. He wrote this, the new book, the Aleister Crowley Manual. This just came out not too long ago. And, you know, this is one of those things like you may have saw at one point. He and I weren't exactly the best of friends. But, you know, we don't agree on everything still. But, you know, if I count the number of people in the world that I do agree on everything about, it's going to be less than one finger. It's going to be none. But the thing about, but you know, that being said, he's also, you know, done things that have been really helpful to me in a lot of ways. You know, well, I'll give you an example. There's people out there that swear that I am like some kind of satanic murderer and that I'm part of some Hollywood Illuminati elite that's, you know, part of some plan to take over society and brainwash people and all this kind of crap. People that still swear to this day that I'm guilty, despite any, you know, they could come up today not only with DNA evidence proving who it was that actually committed the murders that I got sent to prison for, but you could have the person whose DNA was found stand up and confess to it, and these people still would not believe it. And they, you know, they attack me constantly. Have since the beginning. There's some of these people have written entire books about me. You know, keep in mind, most of them are kind of unhinged. One of them recently was putting out stuff about how Ed Sheeran, you know, that red-haired guy, the singer, Ed Sheeran, they were putting out stuff about how he is a member of this infamous magical terrorist group called Order of the Nine Angles or O9A. I mean, just crazy stuff. These people are insane. And they do everything they can to try to attack me and hurt me in any way they can. And he has actually went to bat for me, you know, defending me against these people. So, you know, we may not have always gotten along, but at the same time, you know, he has really kind of like proven himself friend wise in that regard. But I'm not just, you know, I don't just review books for the sake of, you know, like the magical world. It's like this whole big like circle jerk thing. It's the only way I know how to describe it, where everybody reviews everybody's stuff and everybody talks about everybody's stuff and all that kind of thing. Oh, Dustin says he has your book Angels and Archangels on his bookshelf. Excellent. I did not know that. Very good. If I'm talking about stuff on here, if I'm recommending books to you on here, it means I think there's something in them to recommend to you. I'm not doing it just to be, you know, part of that whole scene or whatever. I couldn't care less about that stuff. If I recommend something to you, I'm recommending it because I really think there's something in it. What I think it is that's in this book. Now, keep in mind also, Thelema is not my thing. Might be yours. A lot of people are interested in it. A lot of people, the way they find their way to ceremonial magic is usually because the first thing they hear of in modern times is either Aleister Crowley or Thelema. So it's a thing that a lot of people do have some interest in. And I am by no means an expert on Thelema. Like I said, it's not my thing. My thing has always been astrotheurgy, ceremonial magic, the Golden Dawn, you know, stuff like that, Rosicrucianism. But if you are interested in Thelema, I would highly recommend checking out this book, because what he does in this book, you know how I've always said that what I've tried to do in my books, like there's nothing about magic that I can tell you that someone far more articulate and eloquent and intelligent than me hasn't already said somewhere in some way. All I can do is take it and try to make it easier and more palatable and, more digestible for other people who want to understand this stuff. That's the same thing that Marco did with this book with Thelema and the work of Aleister Crowley. And to be honest, I think it's something that's really, really needed, because I don't think most people really understand Crowley's work. I don't. I think for the most part, people who get drawn to Crowley, a lot of times it's more people that are like in rebellion, like that grew up in like either Christian households or, grew up in the suburbs somewhere or whatever it is. And now Angelica says, now whenever I think of Thelema, I think of cakes of edgelords. Thank you, Gannicus. Yes. So many people out there who wear t-shirts with Crowley on them or whatever, they have no idea like what his work was actually about. It's more like what people call edgelords now. This book is actually goes into what it's about. And it also gives you, tying back into the thing about practical exercises. Like some people get turned off in ceremonial magic by things like how reliant it is, for example, upon Hebrew terminology or upon angels and archangels and things like that. They get turned off by that because it is part of their background and it's something that they're rebelling against, or, it left a bad taste in their mouth or whatever it is. So if you're looking more towards Thelemic versions of some of these rituals, they're included in here. So he even gives like Thelemic versions of the middle pillar where you're not vibrating, the Hebrew names, but you're vibrating like the names that Crowley gave, like Nuit, Hadit, Always, Rahur, Kuit, Babylon, Therion are what you're vibrating for those. But I'm going to read, and I'm going to shut up. I'm trying to keep this to just an hour tonight. I've already went over a little bit, but I just want to give you a brief example of what I'm talking about, how he takes this stuff and makes it really simple. He says, as soon as you've experimented with the technique of concentration described above, let's say having practiced them for at least a week, you can move on to the next one. Once again, an early attempt at drawing down the astral light and reaffirming your connection with the divine, the middle pillar practice is based on the symbolism of the Kabbalistic tree of life. First, you imagine bright light descending and flowing through the body's central axis, marked by a series of energy centers, and visualize specific colors and vibrations of the associated divine names activating these centers. Then, this light is circulated or directed into a particular flow pattern throughout your subtle body, creating a sort of shell and the first layer of your body of light. There are countless variations of this practice, and it's believed that the first to codify it was Israel Regarde, working with material from the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. However, the one you will study here has a specific flavor, and it's the Thelemic middle pillar. And he goes into, I'm not sure who this guy is. Y'all might know him if you're more familiar with Thelema, but he says, there are nearly as many Thelemic variations of this practice as of the Kabbalistic version. The one I am presenting here was taught to me by one of my teachers. While researching and cross-checking my sources for this book, I realized the original author is magician and writer Jason Augustus Newcomb. I want to thank him for giving me the green light to republish it in the present book with some minor personal variations. And then he goes on to tell you how to do it, to give the descriptions, bringing the light down, circulating it. And if y'all are interested in hearing about that, I'll read that later. I'll go through the whole thing and read the whole ritual and give you and do the vibrations and stuff like that. If you're familiar, if you are more interested in doing that, like I said, some people don't necessarily like the Hebrew, the Kabbalistic version. Maybe that's something more that you would be interested in. But what I am going to do also is whenever we start back, whenever we start, I'm going to go back to the very first pledge level, and I want to take people through the steps of magic one more time from beginning to end in as much detail as people need to do these rituals, because I still get questions from people asking about things like doing the quabbalistic cross. And if you can't do those basic things, if you don't understand those basic things, you're not going to be able to do the things later. That doesn't mean that you're going to understand, everything about all of these. You will still find stuff about the basic rituals that you learn, like what they call the everyday rituals in the Golden Dawn, like the LBRP, the Lesser Hexagram ritual, all that sort of stuff. If you continue your study and your practice, you'll continue to learn things even about those rituals for years and years down the road. And that's kind of what I want to go into a little bit. We're going to start all over. Yep, the neophyte battery. Exactly, Gannicus. But that's what we're going to start doing, starting at the lowest, at like whoever's pledging at like $5 a month. That's where we're going to start at doing the stuff, working our way through there. Let me see what y'all are saying. If there's anything else. I don't know. Holly says, another random question. Seeing that book, mostly in pictures, is there a certain age a child should be when taught these things? I homeschool and have wondered if I should teach them this or let them. Um, you know, Anything I said about that would obviously just kind of be my opinion on the subject. Uh, and keep in mind a lot of the stuff, like with Kabbalah, in like hardcore Jewish Kabbalah, you didn't learn, like they said, you didn't usually start learning that stuff until you were 40, like after you turned 40 years old. Part of it was because by that point in your life, you were expected to have settled down. You were going to be secure in your career, in your family life, in your daily routines. You weren't still out there going crazy and partying and sowing the seeds of love or whatever the hell it is people do these days. You would have kind of established your life by that point, and you were able to dedicate time and energy and focus to this stuff. That being said, I didn't wait till I was 40 before I started, studying any of this stuff. I started when I was in my teenage years. But a lot of it comes down to, how much can someone understand? And that's going to vary from person to person. Honestly, I think there are people that are 40 that don't have the capacity to understand some of this stuff. And I think there are some people who are 20 that have enough capacity to understand a lot more of it than some people who are 50. I don't think that those are kinds of things you can necessarily like put a hard limit on. I think all that kind of stuff varies from person to person. I think it's also important to keep in mind a lot of the things that people get introduced to when they're really young by their parents, they don't want anything to do with later. Going back to what Gannicus was saying about the edgelordy stuff. If you introduce them to this stuff now, then when they go through their rebellious teenage stage of development, then they might not want anything else to do with magic again. Who knows? That's just me sitting here pontificating. There's no hard and fast rules for these sort of things. So take it with a grain of salt. All right, I'm going to shut up and try to keep this to an hour for the first time in a very long time. I went a little bit over, but I think we did fairly well. Not as much crazy rambling as usual. I just want to say, as usual, thank you guys for being with me on this ride. Thank y'all for supporting me. Thank y'all for caring about this stuff. And thank y'all for being part of this process with me. I greatly appreciate it. And I will see y'all soon in a few days.